Hello and welcome to another episode of Binkhorsts and Blockbusters. I'm Cait,
I'm Garrett.
and we are reviewing one of my favorite films, Alien.
Yes, this is an excellent movie, and we have a lot to say about it.
Yeah, this might be a long one, folks.
So strap in. But first, uh, what was on the TV? So I rewatched The Last of Us recently, and this is a really great show on HBO. Um, I was kind of worried it wouldn't hold up to a rewatch, and in some ways it did, in some ways it didn't. I wanted to fast forward through a few of the less interesting parts, but I'm glad, particularly episode three still held up really well. It was very entertaining and still had, the weight of impact from the first time I saw it.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And another thing that I think is interesting about this show and talking about it in the context of also talking about Alien is we have just a really fantastically well developed and artistic monsters that I think, they're from the same like good place of creative energy.
Oh,
And I
absolutely.
loved this show. So I'm glad it holds up and hopefully I'll get to watch it again sometime soon.
Yeah, definitely. Before the second season comes out. Um, so I make video games. That's what I do. So I'm always happy to see a video game adaptation, and this is one that I think worked really well. Beyond just the fact that the game is a bit more of a cinematic experience, but like I feel like it's still held up in that regard um, compared to other attempts that have been made. It'll be interesting to see what happens to the second season, but I'm sure we'll talk about that as it comes out.
Yeah, I'm sure it's one that we'll be talking about pretty weekly as episodes appeared. When is it releasing?
No idea. Uh,
Okay, so
the
it's likely held up by various strikes, and we'll be talking about it in like 3 years. So,
Yeah, that's 100% could be what happens. I've also heard they're working on a re-release or remaster of the second video game, which only came out like a couple years ago, which in my opinion doesn't make a lot of sense. But that's the state of the video game at the moment.
interesting.
Yes.
Sadly, I didn't watch anything on TV this week other than our feature film, Alien.
Yes. So let's get into it. Alien is a film. It is directed by Ridley Scott and written by Dan O'Bannon. Um, It was released in 1979 and went on to win just a bunch of awards. It won the Academy Awards for the Best Visual Effects, and it was nominated for the Best Art Direction. It won the Saturn Award for the Best Sci-Fi Film, Best Direction, and Best Supporting Actress. And it also won some awards from the British Academy of Film for the sound and production design.
Yeah, these awards were well deserved. The sound, the production, the film, the acting. I mean, it really is a phenomenal masterpiece of art.
Yes. Uh,
And the
it
movie poster's really good too. Like that's a stellar movie poster.
Yes, and so this is a bit interesting. So, if you're familiar with the film Alien, you would know that there's a scene where they discover the alien eggs, and they look much different from the egg that's pictured here. This is a chicken egg, and that's because the scenes that were shot with the egg were done in post-production to kind of stitch some things together, I suppose. And that's where they had the more iconic egg. And because they didn't have that footage or pictures or things in in time to like promote the film with trailers and posters, they just used an egg, which I think works very well as a means of like, well, there's this egg that like we're very familiar with. We've all seen a chicken egg. And then when we get to it in the movie, it's like, this isn't what I was promised. I was deceived.
Yeah, but I mean at the same time, I think that as iconic as this movie poster is, I've never noticed that there was that big of a difference. And then The movie trailer too is in space no one can hear you scream, and it's a silent movie trailer with the egg.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I think that it doesn't matter because the egg is so big and important, and it's got so much weight to it that, even vaguely egg shaped, we're in.
Yeah. Um, to talk about numbers. So this movie was made for a very small budget of $11 million, and that the return at the box office was 184 million. So just an immensely successful film.
Wow.
Um, so due to the success of Star Wars a few years earlier in 1977, excuse me, um, there was like this reinvigoration of science fiction movies and content. And the success of Star Wars is what gave Fox the confidence to dump lots of money into this project. It was pitched as being Jaws in space, which is funny because we just reviewed that movie a few weeks ago. And it's kind of rare at this time for there to be these sci-fi movies, but Star Wars, Alien, gave it a big push to keep sci-fi going, especially into the 80s. Um, the last thing I think we can mention here is that Alien spawned a colossal franchise of Alien and its connection to Predator. It spawned tons of comic books, toys, DVDs, video games, all sorts of stuff like that. If we look at just the movie, though, there have been uh, about $370 million put into the Alien movies, just the mainline ones, and it's made $1.3 billion worldwide just from the box office, so none of the DVDs and stuff. And it really shows no sign of slowing down, and that this is just an immensely profitable franchise that we'll probably see a lot more of in our lifetimes. Um, So, um, I think the first place we have to start when we talk about Alien is to talk about the alien itself and art and the mind behind that. So we'll introduce H.R. Geiger. So pictured here is the inspiration for Alien that comes from a work Geiger did called the Necronomicon, and this is Necronom 4. Um, and this was the art piece that basically got him into the film, working on it, and created the alien monster that we know from so many movies.
Yeah, he was a phenomenal artist, and he had such a wide and deep body of work, all in this style with these creatures doing various things, and all in this very creepy and strange, way. I mean, they're all very phallic. You can't get beyond that. They
Yeah,
all have weird tubes. They all have weird, like, almost connections to technology. And, when I think about sci-fi and growing up thinking about the future, I thought we'd have flying cars, and I thought there would be tubes everywhere because the Matrix taught me that the ceilings are just full of tubes.
yes,
Um, so these monsters are just full of tubes, but also bones and viscera and strange limbs, elongated skulls. And they're just so iconic. And there's nothing, I can't think of another artist who had this kind of very specific art style that impacted film in a way like this.
yeah, it's so iconic. And if you look at some of Geiger's other works, it all feels, it all has that same, biomechanical look to it that
Hmm.
uh,
Definitely.
really works in Alien. Um, so we mentioned before a person named Dan O'Bannon who wrote this movie, and this next segment, it really all comes back to Dune. Um, so Dan O'Bannon, he'd written most of this movie and wanted to make a horror film that was set in space. And he worked on a film with John Carpenter, who's another famous director that also has a lot of really cool movie monsters. Um,
Yeah.
and they worked on Dark Star together, which was another early science fiction work. But the writer, he wanted something that was a bit less humorous and more serious. Um, and he worked on a lot of the effects, and he also worked a bit on Star Wars. So the reason why I bring this up is, and Dune, is because he was hired along with H.R. Geiger to work on Alejandro Jodorowsky's Dune. So this is probably one of the more famous movies that never existed. Um, Tons and tons of money was already poured into like pre-production and ideas and hiring, Salvador Dali, getting all these artists and things attached to it, and it just never went anywhere. Um, it was, before Star Wars, so people were even more apprehensive about science fiction content, and it was a massive, massive film that Jodorowsky was making that was inspired and kind of an adaptation to Dune. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about that when we get to our actual like Dune discussions. Um, but this is
Yeah,
where,
and
yeah, go ahead.
it's so disappointing to me that we don't have a Salvador Dali inspired Dune in our great plethora of Dune films that have been made. And it really is a failing of our society to not make that happen.
Yeah, if given, a bajillion dollars in a time machine, this is one of the projects that I want to see through, and I feel like it would
Absolutely,
it
yeah.
would completely change the cinema landscape, honestly, in the
Hmm.
same way that Star Wars did. Um,
Yeah.
so
I mean, we could still make it happen, but I do think the God Emperor of Dune might be the Salvador Dali film. So, maybe we can influence Hollywood enough to make that happen.
yeah, hopefully, I hope they get that far eventually. It might take a few reboots and more creatives and stuff, but who knows? Maybe one day we'll see the God Emperor of Dune.
I
Um,
hope so.
So Dan O'Bannon, he met H.R. Giger in Paris, and he said his paintings and art was very disturbing, but they had such a profound effect on them that they'd never seen anything that was quite so horrible and at the same time so beautiful.
Hmm.
And he ended up writing the script about a Geiger monster. So like before Geiger was brought into the film, the idea of that like he was making this monster was a part of it. Um, the Fox executives were a bit worrisome about having Geiger come in on the project because it's very phallic. It's not super family friendly, let's say. It's not as marketable, which is why you don't see the marketing for Alien having the alien and its sparse use, I guess. Um, but
Man, I bet they're eating their words now,
yeah,
being that this is the most recognizable alien to ever be made.
yeah, it's definitely up there. It's definitely one of them.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, when I talk about aliens and you talk about, oh, the shape of the aliens, God, just norm. When you say alien, you think, gray one, whatever from the cartoon. When
yeah,
you say the alien, you mean this.
yes,
And
uh,
I can't think of a better branding than that.
yeah. It's so iconic. It stands up the whole franchise. Also, briefly attached to this project was Mobius, who was a famous comic book graphic novelist at the time, one of the more iconic names in that field. And they were also attached to the Dune project, going so far as to storyboard most of the content of the movie in their comic book style. Um, and then that just fell by the wayside once that all fell apart. But Mobius was responsible for drawing what would eventually become the spacesuits, which are another iconic, you know, almost creature design in this film. Um, and our last bit about the alien and Geiger for a bit, we'll come back to him. He worked exclusively on the alien. He was responsible for the egg, the face hugger, the chest burster, the alien, the derelict ship design. And I think that really works well to give all of that mythos a cohesive vibe. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. There's clear artistic connections between each of those things and the alien ship and even a lot of the little details on the ship that they're on, the Ripley ship. So I really think that it pulls it all together. The artistic direction is phenomenal and so good. Like he was such a great artist. I really love his work.
yeah, just fantastic stuff. Um,
Yeah, if you've never seen his larger body of work, definitely Google it, look at it online, and you'll see the depth that he was going for in this whole world that he built and his ideas and all of that.
yeah, it's so well crafted. Um,
Hmm.
just and it's very visually striking. I don't think we can say that enough.
Right.
uh, so um, the next big part of Alien has a lot to do with the crafts, the sets, the space suits, the overall vibe and look to it. Um, so there were three big sets that were constructed for this film. There was the Nostromo, which is Ripley's ship. There was the Derelict spaceship, and the planet that they visit. On screen right now, we have a picture of the space jockey, which is probably the most iconic, uh, set outside of the Nostromo. You have some other hallways and things, and them walking around, but I think this is the first thing that the audience sees that goes, "Yeah, this is Alien. This is something beyond our comprehension."
Yeah, and playing with the scale here and having the original Alien and the original Alien ship be just massive compared to a human form. I think that that was just a fantastic idea to magnify the strangeness, the difference, just how weird this alien creature and this place is.
Yeah. Um, so this set was also used for the egg chamber because they were able to remove the big spinning platform that the space jockey was on. Um, and only one section of wall with here was built because this is just a huge set. You can see the people for scale, so the walls are probably 20, 25 feet tall. The space jockey himself is, 10, maybe 12 feet tall in length. So it's almost hard to tell the scale. Um,
Yeah.
uh,
But every bit of it is it has a vibe to it. It's dingy, it's dirty, it's organic, but also made of metal. So it's totally different from, the very perpendicular and modular world that is coming out of the 80s where everything looks like a VCR or
yes.
a Soviet, block building.
And it offers such a great contrast to the Nostromo, where there are a whole lot more angles and things, and here there are these giant sweeping curves.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, and it's also such a great contrast to the other science fiction films that have come out so far. Like, if we just named 2001: Space Odyssey and Star Wars, both of those, the space is not that creative. It's very much like a bunch of VCRs put together. It it's very blocky. You could have the set of from Chernobyl's, control room in any of those in either of those films, and you wouldn't blink an eye. You're just like, okay, that's what that looks like.
yeah,
But in this, it's totally organic. It's totally different. It's totally alien. It's weird shaped. It's not a flying saucer. It's a crescent. Like what is this place? How does it fly? Where does it move? No, we have no idea because it's so different and it's nothing like anything we've ever seen before.
And nothing like what we've seen since. Um,
Hmm.
this spaceship really succeeds in its uniqueness and that it's never really been replicated. Um, like not even the idea of having like some kind of like big organic craft. At least not really. In some media, definitely. Um, I know Warhammer has something similar, and like some video games have big alien monsters, that are as big as spaceships. But I think that's very different from the look that this is going of this like uh rib cage meets tubes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that the only thing that really comes to mind as being anywhere close is maybe the Matrix, where you have like the robot world, not robot world, but
Right. The
Sentinel world kind of thing where you do have organic tubes, or you have, yeah, you have,
the robots with tendrils,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that's I think as close as we get in any other films, but yeah, I think that's one of the failings of modern sci-fi is that basically it's all just a flying saucer of varying sizes with a sometimes interesting alien, like the alien from Independence Day was interesting. The
Yeah.
aliens from District 9 are interesting, but the ship is just a large flying saucer.
With
It's not very exciting.
Yeah. And in a lot of sci-fi now, all the controls are on a damn computer screen. There's so much less that's tactile. There's so much less that's like interactable and makes it feel like so real. One of the great things about like the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon is all the like levers and things that they're pushing around that makes the ship go. Whereas
Yeah.
like you don't have that same feeling when it's all like these screens and people are just like clicking wildly and images get added in post that like mean nothing. Um,
Hmm. Well, and I think that it'll be interesting to see in our lifetimes how much that comes to fruition with technology, given that like all the Teslas have basically just a giant iPad inside it to control everything from turning on the car to, changing the radio station. And I wonder how much utility that is actually going to have over time. And I think that going back to an analog system that is more tactile and also more permanent
yes.
will and lasting. Like if you crack your iPad screen there, you're not going to be able to fly your spaceship, whereas having a bunch of buttons is really ideal. However, I know that the SpaceX things are all just iPads too. So I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how that develops in a practical sense, rather than just a science fiction sense. Because I am all for analog buttons in both systems, but I'm curious how that's going to change over time.
Yeah, I'm interested to see because I really like the tactile, the big clicky keyboards, switches and things. I think in our Titanic episode we talked about the submarine there that really just had like one screen and was controlled by a video game controller. I'm not gonna get on a vehicle that doesn't have the proper number of switches and knobs and big valves and stuff to turn. And in both of the spaceships we see in Alien, we see these big tactile structures and things that very much like lead you to believe these are things to be controlled. Where if you looked at like a spaceship now that was left derelict, you just see a bunch of black canvases and be confused.
Yeah, there'd be no way to figure out how to turn it on, which
Yeah,
you're not deviating from a cell phone very far here.
yeah. um a couple last things about this segment. So in the egg room scene, there's a bunch of lights and stuff, and I thought this was a fun fact. So these lights and the lighting effects were borrowed from the rock band The Who. because
Oh, fabulous.
they were on a sound stage next door, and they were just like, yeah, can we borrow these? So a lot of the lights and things you've seen are what are going to be used in their, rock and roll shows later on, which we've both seen. So
Yeah.
it maybe
Well,
we saw those same lights. Who knows?
I doubt it. But
Yeah.
one of the things that I actually thought was really beautiful, and I hadn't noticed it before, was that, when they're in the egg room and there's that like level of fog and that like
Yes.
purple light that goes across, and he's like, "Oh, what is this?" And which eventually draws him in to be, you know, attacked by the facehugger. Yeah, I just thought that was a beautiful touch, and it's also, kind of like an interesting connection to like humans' inability to say no to something cool and shiny looking,
Yes.
which, is a natural, inclination, because generally in nature, things that are shiny and shimmering are water, which is generally a good thing for us humans to have. And
Hmm.
that's why we're inclined toward glittery things. But yeah, this didn't work out for him in the same way. And I think that touch was just so good. I'm so glad they borrowed those lights. Phenomenal.
Yes. And that kind of got me thinking about, when this movie came out and kind of like more vibes in the cultural sphere. So, 1969, we land on the moon, and we went back to the moon a few times between then and the 80s when we stopped. So, like, seeing a sci-fi movie, and like 2001 is all about like exploring the unknown and trying to like find something, and investigate, and then having this just be about like basically space truckers, and then they come up against this thing that's like, they're discovering it. These are the first people that have possibly ever seen this. And I think, looking at it from that perspective, you see more of like, oh yeah, if you were in a position where you could like find a discovery that would change the world, of course you'd, look in on it. You'd be curious. Your mind would be full of all sorts of ideas. And even after you see this big alien that has its chest cavity ripped out from the inside, you wouldn't necessarily see that as a warning, but more of like, huh, that's different.
Yeah, yeah, I think that your curiosity would overwhelm you at that point. Yeah,
Um,
and yeah, going
yeah.
back to 1979 as kind of like an aside. So I'm a big fan of techno music. I mean, I love the Who too, but like I'm really into techno, and an interesting problem that is occurring in my Spotify algorithm is that I will be listening to techno and it's wonderful, and I'm like adding stuff to playlists, and I'll be like, "Oh, this is a new band that sounds really good. Oh, I really like this album." And I'll be like, "Oh, did this just come out?" No, it's always from 1979. So I am just perpetually listening to music from 1979. And I would really love to find new music. Comment down below new music that you think I would like. If you're into Kraftwerk from 1979, tell me about modern music that gives me the same vibes, because I would like that. But like, music in 1979 is like walking on the 2001 Space Odyssey of the future. For whatever reason, my version in my head of what the future should be happened in 1979. It's very bizarre. This is a Caitlin problem. I
Yeah,
can't understand it.
okay.
But your point is that like in space movies, like, and in this like vision of the future, you have, Star Wars has come before this. What else?
Uh, 2001, the Star Trek show was before this, which had a very positive outlook on all of the future. Um, there really wasn't anything this gritty.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This is certainly a gritty outlook on life, and yeah.
Um, yeah, so one last detail about like the space jockey mythos part of this. So well, I guess two. So in one of the original drafts of the script, instead of finding the eggs down here, they were going to find the eggs in like a pyramid that was also on the planet, and there they were going to see like hieroglyphs that would have alluded to the alien's life cycle, and that was cut for budgetary reasons. And I think it works a lot better here because it gives you, well, once you realize that later in the film that the space jockey was a victim of these alien eggs, I feel like it's you start to ask more questions. Um, you start to wonder, well, like, why did it have so many if it got, caught with them, or where do the eggs come from? Things like that that don't really get answered, which helps amplify the horror, like we talked about in Jaws. The scary things aren't necessarily what you see, it's what your mind is piecing together.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a huge thing in this movie is that we have no answers in this movie, and the franchise does later on provide answers, but very much in this moment you have no idea who these aliens are. You don't even realize they're two different kinds of aliens. Like you don't know if they're two different kinds of aliens. You really don't. Um, you don't know, where they come from. You don't know why the spaceship is making you do this, other than just like exploratory nonsense. You don't realize the, motivations behind the various actors here. Like it very much is a you know nothing as both the viewer and the person on the spaceship.
Yeah. And until the rest of the crew gets back, they're completely in the dark of what's going on because their radios have been cut out. Um, so let's move on to talking a little bit more about the Nostromo, which is our big location for the ship. So I included a few shots of the med lab, which I think is one of the better sets in the movie because it feels so much like a realized idea of what like a like stripped down hospital med bay could look like in a science fiction thing.
Hmm. Yeah, and I really love, so another thing going back to Star Trek original series and Star Wars, both of them were extremely low budget as far as the sets went. A lot of the sets, like you find out, were, they were gluing soccer balls that they spray painted onto the walls. They were, it was all made of cardboard. Things were just spray painted because they had to do it low budget, and I like that because it gives kind of it gives an alien feel in a kind of like crafty way. But this movie goes back to the precedent that was set with Space Odyssey, where you have a fully fleshed out spaceship that has a vibe, that has shapes. It's not a box. It has round rooms. It has buttons. It has a whole semiotic code of languages for these shapes,
Yeah,
like that makes sense. And it has different sections and different like uh, lots of things are happening here, which can easily be overlooked if you're not paying attention.
yeah. The all the like padded walls and things like that that you see in the crew's quarters, like the pods that they all sleep in are all very, very cozy and warm. The computer room is, this big tan space with a comfy chair. Their like common area where they all sit is full of like, it's cozy, but it's also a bit industrial. Every other space is dark, dingy. There's steam, there's water dripping, there are big chains, giant grates. It does an amazing job of like separating these like living and maintenance areas that, highlights not only the like structure of the ship, but also then a little bit that gets touched on, but the class divide that occurs on board.
Yeah, yeah, you have the maintenance guys who work in the dingy, areas, whereas everybody else is on this like well-lit bridge. And I think it's interesting and it's so well thought out too, because you have this, this isn't just a spaceship, it's got a purpose. It does some kind of like mining, I think.
So the Nostromo is towing a giant ore refining machine, and they're bringing that back to Earth, and they're basically space truckers. And I guess you just need a bunch of people to not only maintain the ship, but to be able to like go and do something like this. Everyone has different roles. We have the two mechanics. We have a science officer who acts as like the medic, a captain, first mate, and Ripley, who's I think the second or third in command. Well, the third in command, behind Kane and Dallas. So you have like this structure. You have all these people that have different roles, um, and it's very different from like the kind of like cowboy spaceships from Star Wars, where it's just two guys and they fly around something and like are hired out, and then much different from, Star Trek or 2001 that are mostly scientists that are just like trying to learn.
Yeah, yeah, there's no overt science angle where we're going exploring in space. These are not those kind of people. Like this is, just a business operation,
Mhm.
and they have a job to do. They're going to go do it. They're going to come back. In that way, it's so different from most of the sci-fi movies of the 90s for sure,
Oh
but
yeah,
many of the other, 80s sci-fi movies too.
yeah. Um, and so Roger Ebert, he's a famous movie critic from the Times. And he said that one of the great things about this movie and what made all the characters and action so believable is like the camaraderie and the interactions between the people here, and that these are all older people that are in these roles, and it makes a whole lot more sense to have people who seem like they have experience, and that helps you immerse you. Like Dallas definitely commands his crew and acts like he has, many flights under his belt. Ash is very, uh, you know, forward about his job and about his interests, and then the mechanics definitely seem like, yeah, they've been screwed out of their shares in the past. They want more. This is their opportunity to like negotiate for more, and they're willing to hold everybody up so they can get more out of it. They're all very like fleshed out and realized. They're not, this isn't their first time in space.
Yeah, I definitely like that. I wish that the Ditzy Blonde had been a little less Ditzy Blonde or had a little more, I don't know. They would
Yeah,
have given a little more to her.
Lambert doesn't do a lot. She screams a lot. But so originally this movie did have a 3 hour long cut, so it's possible that some of her characterization was removed. She's definitely the least developed of any of the crew members by, I think, quite a bit. Um,
Yeah, which is not a surprise in 1979. And I do think that she has, and it would make sense that they cut some of it because she's the navigation person, I think. And so like her job is to, navigate from wherever they are to Earth once they wake up, which
mhm,
makes sense that she then doesn't have a job once they figure out that they're just kind of in space.
yes. You touched on the symbols and things, and these were designed by Ron Cobb, who worked on Star Wars and Back to the Future, and he created all these symbols that you can see, scattered throughout the ship, and really help like give it a cohesive vibe. In that, like, this is something that was manufactured. These are symbols that exist, and everybody who flies in space knows what these mean. Um, uh, Roger Christian, who was the art director on this film and also worked on Star Wars, used scrapped bomber aircrafts and mirrors to create the lower decks and like the hallways and things like that. So I think we've talked about this before in something, but George Lucas, who did Star Wars, had this concept of greebling, which was you just take like basically like model kit parts and glue them onto things. And like you mentioned about this, like with soccer balls and gluing them on. And you see that a lot in the outside of the spaceships and shots like that of the Nostromo and the oil refinery. Um, because those were miniatures, and there were several different scales of miniatures that they made. And halfway through filming, Ridley Scott made some like pretty drastic changes to the miniatures. The Nostromo was originally yellow, and they changed that to gray, which I think is a good choice because
Yeah, yellow would have been too much.
yeah. And he also took a hammer and chisel to the spires of the refinery, just like breaking the model down because he had problems with it, which no doubt upset the art team that was working on it. And I think it's, kind of a bad move. Make things more interesting. Just, don't break these things. They also use parts of model railroad kits to make the detachment sequence when the Nostromo goes down to the planet surface. And when you see images from like the outside looking in, they used a pretty interesting technique of projecting like film of the actors onto canvases behind smaller models. So it would look like they were like working inside, which is, obviously something you would never see today because it would just be easier to completely CGI absolutely everything that's on this ship and just film them all in green screen.
Yeah, but that is such a creative idea to throw in there, though. I don't I think that the one issue that I have with this one is that the connection between the interior shots and the sets that we see and the exterior shots that are modeled, it's not very understandable. It's hard to figure out where they are. The scale is so strange. Like when they're going through the ducts and stuff, you don't have a good understanding of, where they are in this big ship
Yes,
and how big the ship is and how small
absolutely.
they are in the ship. And that's a real struggle. I don't think it's that important. It doesn't take away from the movie, but I do think it's the one issue that I have with that connection. And I mean, it's going to be an issue that will be difficult for most movies unless you model the interior as well as the exterior and, map it out.
Yeah. I think a little bit of that helps us as viewers be disorientated and like how all these things connect. But
Hmm.
yeah, it really doesn't help in the end when we just see Ripley running down what seem to be like the same few hallways and then ending up
Hmm.
in completely different places. Um, it's just kind of weird. But again, when you're
Yeah.
working with a lower budget and things like that, like you have to make those cuts. And I feel like it works well, but
Hmm.
I agree. I never understood how big the Nostromo was or what it looked like even. It's
Well, and this is something that we talked about when we were talking about Titanic, is that the film does a great, Titanic does a great job of walking you through the ship so you get your bearings and you are able to figure out in kind of a just a spatial way where everything is, how big everything is, how far apart different things are, and this movie just does not do that. And I can't really think of another sci-fi movie that does, other than Space Odyssey, but that has to do with the spaceship being, relatively small
yeah.
and yeah,
Yeah, I suppose it's difficult to do something like that. But yeah, I mean, the Titanic did it perfectly.
yeah.
You understood not only the layout, but all of the different like groupings and things. But um,
Well, and I think that that's a product of, so many of A, having the ship plans,
yes,
and B, having people who are experts in those things. Whereas in most sci-fi movies, you don't make a map of the ship, which is, antithetical to most, like, it's like, say, if you're doing a D&D campaign in space, you have a map of that ship.
right,
If you have a real ship, you have a map of the ship. If you have I mean, that I'm sure that like with the International Space Station, so like in Armageddon, when you're on the International Space Station, or not International, it's the Russian Space Station in Armageddon, you have a mental map of that ship because there is a real map of that ship.
right.
And I think they even put it on the screen at some point. But maps, everybody needs maps.
Yeah.
Refer to the maps.
So the Nostromo is definitely a very iconic spaceship, but what's probably more iconic is the interiors and kind of like what goes on, not the outside, because I couldn't tell you what it looked like.
Yeah,
Um,
it's just kind of a gray blob
yeah.
with windows.
So one of the other things that makes the Nostromo and the ship and really all of this movie so immersive are a lot of the sounds. Things like the alarms, the beeps, the boops, the clickety clacks of the computer, the laser sounds on the screen, all the CRT monitors and old things and flips and switches. All those sounds are very unique It's not like they were coming from a stock audio library or, something like that. They all felt alien, to us.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what was going on in sound in 1979, but it was wonderful. I wish I was there.
Yeah, well, they found the synthesizer and they were like, shit, we can make whatever we want in that.
Yeah, I mean, it really is the moment where the synthesizer takes off.
Yes. Um, and one last part, and this is about the alien. So the alien sounds were made by this guy, Percy Edwards, who is a voice artist who I learned provided the bird sounds for British television in the 60s and 70s. And he also did the sounds for killer whales. Um, so, I think in Jurassic Park, a lot of those sounds were like amalgamations of like birds and lions and other monsters and things like that. But the sounds of the alien were coming from a person and, were their own design, which is scary.
Yeah, that's pretty horrifying.
So now we can go on to talk about probably the most iconic scene in the film. Uh, here he is. He's just a little guy.
Yeah, just a little guy.
Yeah. So there's a lot to be said about just this scene in particular where the alien emerges from Kane's chest. So in the script of the film, it's just stated this thing emerges. That's it. That's all you get for the scene.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's all anybody knew. The thing emerges.
Yes. So
Yeah.
the cast and crew had much different like experience with what goes on in this scene. So I'll talk a little bit about the cast first. So they have Kane. He's built into the table for all intents and purposes. So he's there. He understands more or less what's going to happen because he has to act, appropriately and dead. Um, the rest of the actors had seen the alien puppet, but didn't quite know how it was going to emerge or what was going to happen. There were two shots of this scene, um, two takes, excuse me. And in the first one, a squib, which is what they used to use for gunshots, is just a packet of blood that can explode, on a, basically its own wire kind of thing. That went off, covered his shirt, and then the alien had trouble pushing through his shirt, so they, stopped what they were doing, redid it, and this set up the cast to be like really close in and really interested in what it was going to look like. Because another fact of this scene is it smelled horrible. Sigourney Weaver says in her interview, she talks about how bad it smells because that day they went out and bought fish guts and stuff from a fishmonger, and and that was just kind of like in this fake body cavity that the puppet was in. So just really gross, horrible smell, especially cooking underneath the lights. So, above all, the sets are just like these colossal big lights that produce shitloads of heat. They're gonna, nearly cook whatever's underneath it. Um, there were also gallons of blood that were sprayed all over, which is, fantastic. And more blood the merrier, more than is in the human body, which, is great. Uh,
Fun.
yeah. So when the alien does manage to shoot out, the reactions of the cast were genuine. Um, and they were surprised and shocked and all leaning in close to see what was going to be because none of them knew about the porosity, none of them knew about the blood that was going to be sprayed out. Um, the actress who plays Lambert, they say a couple sources say that she passed out during this scene, but she's still visibly there. Another one that I think is more accurate, they say like she fell over and after being sprayed with blood. Yeah, you understand that. I think you see a little bit of that in the film. Um, After this scene, the actor who plays Parker, he just went off alone to sit in his trailer. He wasn't going to talk to anybody. A lot of the actors felt like bamboozled, um, and I feel like it helps capture what became the most iconic scene of this movie and really sci-fi and horror movies in general.
Yeah, I mean it is a phenomenal film, and I don't think there's anything more iconic than the Chestburster.
Yeah. Um, so after it comes out, it scampers off, and they once again cut open the table to have like a rail that the puppeteer could, pull the chest burster off. And really just it's weird in its movements, it's terrifying in its appearance, and it being so small and wrecking that kind of hell is really a horrifying thing for our cast of characters to see and to know that that's what they're going to be up against for the rest of the movie.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean they also have that false sense of security given that I mean it's small, it's a small parasite thing. They don't realize what's going to happen yet.
Yeah,
They think it's the size of a cat, they're not concerned about it, even
yeah,
as it's gross, but it's just a little guy.
yeah, he's just a little guy.
Yeah,
um
just a little guy.
uh Yeah, we see them go off on an adventure to try to find this, and like they've built like makeshift cattle prods, and like, oh yeah, that'll get them, and they have a net, and it's like, oh, it's so simple, and they think it'll be so easy. Um, and we get our first of many jump scares that include cats. I think that there's got to be someone out there who's done a video essay about horror film jump scares that are just cats and things. But Jonesy in this film just takes the cake of being like this great reactive and expressive cat that like interacts with this monster and is just like, I don't want any part of this. Please get me out of here.
Yeah, and he's a very sympathetic character too, because you're afraid that the monster is going to eat him, and you definitely don't want that to happen either.
Yes, you want to see the cat survive like you want to see Boomer survive in Independence Day.
Yeah. Yeah, the cat's such an interesting thing because, like cats on spaceships is a whole genre of science fiction, and well, same as cats on regular ships. And the like, but also the question, like, where was the cat when they were all sleeping? Like,
So,
who was feeding the cat?
well, in the end of this movie, Ripley puts Jonesy in one of the pods. So
Right.
I would imagine it was in a pod with another person.
Okay.
Maybe not hooked up to all the wires and shit like they are, but probably in the pod. Um, yeah, but that is a good question because they touch on this in the other Alien movies, but like they're out in space for a long ass time in these like sleeping pods. So yeah, the cat would be really old or dead if they didn't put it
Yeah,
in
I
the
mean, because
pod.
even if it was just eating, mice and whatever, like eventually it would eat all the mice. I mean, unless the mice population was really out of control. But like,
Yeah.
yeah. How is the cat subsisting? That is my question.
Yeah, and we see them talk several times about how shitty the food is. So if the cat wasn't happy with the food, I don't think the cat's eating. And in space, no one can hear you meow. So
That is true.
um, shall we move on?
Yeah, yeah. I think we covered this one.
Okay. So we need to talk about Sigourney Weaver and Ellen Ripley. So I think, at this point in movies and cinema, and especially in our show, we haven't really come across an action hero yet. Um, and well, in cinema in general, we haven't come across that many female action heroes. And Ridley Scott was really persistent about making this an action heroine of having this woman come and save the day, uh, and having her be the focus of the film, and he does an amazing job at that. Ellen Ripley is one of those characters and heroes that is so much larger than just their appearance on screen. They're an action figure, they're a star in comic books, they're part of all the spin-offs and whatever, and she's so iconic and just amazing and a larger than life figure. And this movie being the start and having, so many iconic things, really builds up this character to be one of cinema's greats.
Yeah. Yeah, and so it really starts for me I mean, I think she's amazing, but like her, you know, knowledge and intellect really starts to show when the three are coming back from their little spacewalk on the planet, and she doesn't want to let them in the door.
Right.
And that was the correct choice, as we find out later on. Um, and she wants to hold to that, and of course, she is overruled by Ash, who has different motives. And I mean, like, you can tell, like, she has power, she has conviction, she has intelligence, she's ready to do the thing that is protocol because it's the right thing to do, not just because it's protocol and not because of some other, terrible motivation. And she does have everybody's, welfare in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Until Ash is killed, she's very much of the mindset we need to, kill this animal so we can, keep living on our spaceship because the escape pod can only hold three people. Um, she has a very strong sense of morality for people and the cat and keeping everybody safe. And that just gets undermined by our second antagonist, Ash.
Yeah. But also, the captain of the ship and Kane both were encouraging her to break the rules in order to save him. And I think that that's one of the reasons why the captain then sacrifices himself to go after the monster, because he knows that this is his fault. Um,
Yes, that and what we see in other ship movies of the captain putting his life ahead of the or putting his life on the line for the crew. It's
yeah.
even in the far distant future we have that mentality for captains.
Well, and it is that kind of like macho man mentality of, oh, I'm gonna do it myself. I don't need help.
Yes. Um, Another thing that makes this character so, interesting and grounded and unique is Sigourney Weaver wasn't, a famous actress at this point. This was the one that really put her on the map and, in front of everybody's face. Whereas, Ian Holm, he was bigger at the time. Uh, I'm forgetting his name, but Kane, who gets chewed on, he was bigger. Even Harry Dean Stanton, he was already a successful movie star. So like having all of the star power and these actors who had more experience, when you start watching the movie, you're like, oh yeah, of course they're gonna save the day. They're gonna be the action hero or whatever. This really subverts your expectations of that by kind of going against a lot of the horror tropes of movies at the time of women being damsels in distress and things like that, where we throw that all out the window.
Yeah, she is definitely somebody who can take care of herself and who takes control when, the power vacuum happens.
Yes. Um, and there's a really great scene where once she takes charge, she's like, well, I'm seeing what the computer has to say, what mother has to say, which is what they call the computer. And like to take on not only the responsibilities of being a captain, but the more corporate duties that exist. And that's where she unravels the conspiracy that uh, their lives are expendable.
Yeah, because the goal is to bring back whatever this is.
Yes. Um, and then she gets into the fight with Ash, which I think we can talk about in our next slide. If there's no more to say directly on Ellen Ripley's character, we'll end up talking more about her legacy at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the other thing to point out is that she's not conventionally attractive. She's not, a Barbie-esque figure with long blonde hair. She's not, that she's not Princess Leia attractive either. And I think that that's important because she begins a, trope in a lot of these kinds of horror and action movies that become big blockbusters and, big summer movies where you have this less than, conventionally attractive woman who becomes the heroine and takes over or assists the hero in, whatever they're doing and whatever the dumb plot is. And I think that, that casting in this is fundamental because without her, you wouldn't have all those later characters. And, I'm thinking about like Tremors and all kinds of other silly movies where you have this less than perfect looking person um, who is ends up saving the day.
Yeah, and it's a great thing to break that mold. Um,
Hmm.
and I'm glad she did it. Somebody had to.
Yeah. Yep. That's all I got on that.
Okay. So one of the big things behind this movie that kind of like I think more viscerally affects you and is definitely something that your subconscious and conscious mind are, you know, playing at and getting to is a lot of the sexual themes and especially sexual violence that exists in the horror and the terror of Alien. And I think that that's one of the things that helps your interpretation of what's going on be more frightening and scary. So we have a couple things we can talk about here.
Yeah. I mean, there's a ton of different very sexual things going on in this film.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about H.R. Geiger's work and the phallic nature of a lot of that, but the look of the spaceship, kind of looks like you're inside some kind of womb, or you're walking through something's guts. Um, it's in just that look, you get that kind of vibe. But then when you look at, the alien, the face hugger, the impregnation, almost the violent birth that it has, the look of the alien, it's all very sexual. It's all very unsettling.
Yeah. Well, and like in the chestburster scene, like when he pops out, he is a phallic shape. It's not, a, overtly alien shape. It's very phallic. And then, the thing that we have not talked about at all was the face hugger, which is
Yes.
a incredibly horrifying phallic monster that sticks its, tentacle down your throat in order to impregnate you with this horrible alien that then bursts out of your chest. Horrifying, very sexual, very disturbing. And it's, like the tentacle that wraps around the neck and the very like bony fingers of this thing,
Yeah,
like
almost like
grabbing you.
crab like.
Yeah. Yeah, very violating. Like these are violating aliens. Like they violate all the characters in their various ways, and they violate your eyes with what they're doing, like the scene where the alien sticks out its tongue and then the other tongue comes out of that tongue, and that is just a lot. Like
Yes.
that is a lot to take. It's overtly sexual, it's violating, it's disturbing. It's also the alien always has kind of a wet look to it, like it's sticky.
Yes, that was KY jelly.
Oh my God.
I'm not making that up. That's I read that.
Yeah, the alien is literally covered in lube.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's gross.
Yeah. Well, and then so the alien is very, violatingly sexual. But, looking at the image on the screen where we have the now dead Ash or dying Ash with all of his white gooey insides coming out of him. Like this is I don't know if this had been done before in a film, but this is the way it was done afterward, where the Android does not is not full of blood, but it's full of like milky fluid for whatever reason, which is super gross, super, it does look like semen. He's covered in this white gooey liquid and all of these wet tentacles and like ew.
So the wet tentacles that are coming out of him are catheters, which,
Catheters
yeah, catheters. Yeah, really gross shit. As well as optical
filled with
filament.
like milk.
Well, I don't know what the liquid is, but it could be milk. It could be
Oh
something.
God, it's
Okay.
gross.
It's probably not milk because that would spoil. It's probably more just like paint or something.
I don't know. I would almost think that they would want to do like a cream so that it curdled and would be even grosser. Like if they're, filling a room with fish guts, like I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
this is
that's
heavy
fair.
whipping cream. Like,
Yeah.
like
Well,
ew.
well, a part of why I think robots have blood that isn't red is to get around sensors, because there's a limit for how much blood you can have, before you get a bad rating. But I think this was rated R, so why
I hope so. I
what
hope so, Garrett. I
yeah,
hope this was rated R.
um so why he's white, I think it's just to be more strange, just to be off-putting,
Yeah.
and um
Well, and it's also like bright, and I think that that's the other, this movie is a land of contrast where,
yes,
the operating theater and the food hall are all bright and white with great lighting, but
yeah,
the rest of the ship is dark and dank, and the monster is always in the shadows, but shiny because it's covered in lube, and like that contrast is just a great contrast.
yeah. Yeah, because when I'm thinking about it, you don't really see, the alien, ripping into people. We do see the dead bodies of Parker and Lambert, but and there is some blood there, but it's not,
But
you
it's
know,
very much in shadow, and
yeah,
you can't tell exactly what the aliens did to them.
yeah,
You know that they got him, but
and
it's like the shark in Jaws. Well,
yes,
they got him, but we don't know what really happened.
yeah, and it's not like what happens in like Aliens where they're shooting off the guns and then the aliens are exploding and there's acid flying everywhere and shit like that. Like it's not that extreme. Um, so one of the writers, Ronald Shusett, I think that's how you say is his last name. If I fuck that up, I'm sorry. He said in an interview, and this was a part of an interview that related a lot to the Chestburster scene. But he said people have read all kinds of things into it that we didn't intend, not even subconsciously. But there is one thing that they did do. It was their idea that this would be the life cycle of an insect, the way a wasp stings a spider, paralyzes it, and lays its eggs in it. The eggs grow off the living spider like a surrogate mother. And I think sure you can go that like the alien is like this parasite, and you can take that angle, but I think it's way too overtly sexual to be able to confidently say that like you were aiming for something more parasitic. I think that's a bit ignorant of your own work.
Yeah, I think that I like that idea of like, but I mean, even the wasp doing that is kind of sexual.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, a little, it's there. But I think that, there's so many ideas in this movie that then get picked up by later movies in the franchise. Like the idea that the alien that it bursts from a human is different from the alien that bursts from a Prometheus or the alien that bursts from a cat. So
Yes.
and that idea I think is just really phenomenal because they're commingling the alien DNA, which is like this great, survival DNA with whatever the host is. So like using the host as more than just a host, but stealing from it and getting evolving from it. I think
Yeah.
that that's a great idea that doesn't come into play at all in this movie, but it's just one of the ideas that you can tell they thought about it in this movie.
Yes.
I think. but it was an idea that didn't come into the script and was then picked up later on.
Yeah. Um, in the original cut, or in, excuse me, not the original cut, but in scenes that were left on the cutting room floor, there was a deleted scene where we get the cocoon um, content that we later see in Aliens, where Ripley discovers uh, Dallas, and he is being like cocooned on the wall, and either the alien's going to eat him or he's going to turn into an egg or something like that. And apparently, really killed the pacing of Ellen of Ripley running around the ship, while it's about to explode. And they really couldn't like justify having a scene where she's just talking to someone. So I'm glad they cut that out. But yeah, you lose out on a little bit of the mythos there, but that's fine. And I feel like that helps keep this theme of the alien is like just this like violent creature that we don't understand at all how it works or how it grows or what it's doing or why it kills.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, like that would just be way too complicated. I agree with them cutting that.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, it's like they thought through this movie completely. Like George
Yes.
Lucas did not think through Star Wars as much as they thought through Alien,
Yes, I 100% agree.
which is it's fantastic. Like I mean, like wow, how many people have thought about Star Wars compared to how many people have thought about Alien? Like we all need to just think about Alien some more.
Yeah, I mean, I like Alien so much. I could watch this movie, 100 times. I've probably seen this movie like a dozen times.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean it's great.
it's it's such a unique take on so many ideas, and it's so horrifying and lingers in your mind for so long, and it's just so damn creative. Um,
Yeah, so the one scene that we haven't talked about that we have to talk about is the scene where Ash tries to kill Ripley.
yes. So in the computer room, Ripley understands that there's information only for the scientist's eyes, and that he's supposed to bring back the alien, and all the crew's expendable, nothing else matters. The company needs that, and she's upset and doesn't want to do that and is going to go against him. And Ash is like, well, I gotta kill this woman.
Yeah, he goes into robot kill mode and is like, nope, dead.
Yeah. So we see an interesting shot of him throwing her onto one of the benches in the uh, cafeteria room, and he's choking her out with a pornographic magazine, shoving it down her throat, which is an interesting move.
Yes,
Um,
like it's such a overt scene and also a foreshadow to the alien mouth, spiraling out. But uh, to be choked, to be a woman being choked with a pornographic magazine is a hell of a thing to put in a movie.
yes,
Like, wow.
and then for her to rise above any kind of you know uh, stereotypes of sexual violence for the rest of the series, to just be a badass and no longer oppressed is a nice arc.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's definitely like her overcoming that, very patriarchal oppression.
Yes,
Absolutely. But then in the background too, you have the pornography on the wall and the picture of the eggs, which
yes,
I had seen this movie probably the most I mostly on TV, and this is a scene that they obviously cut from the film when they put it on AMC because you can't have that on AMC.
yes.
So I watching that scene, I was like, wow, I just I was struck by, how over that moment is in like the writer is really bashing us on the head of, the male killing the female in this situation.
Hmm.
It was overt, it was interesting, it was spicy, it gave it the R rating, which it probably needed.
Yeah. um I agree with you about seeing this movie probably when I was too young to see it. uh and the later movies are less violent and sexually disturbing, I would say. I watched Aliens after this, and that has absolutely none of the themes that this one does at all, um, nor a lot of the things that make this movie great. Um, yeah, this is one that I think not only do you have to be mature to be able to talk about it and to be able to understand it, but I think you need to have some experience to better frame the terror and violence.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true because a lot of these overtly sexual references just fly over your head if you're too young to really understand them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even like the subtle one of when Lambert and Parker are being attacked and like you see the alien's tail just like start to go up Lambert's leg. Like that's
Hmm.
very overtly sexual, but like it's not like you wouldn't necessarily understand, that.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah, yeah, that is yeah, there are just so many, violating things. Like the alien is a violating alien.
it's an ambush predator.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's horrifying.
Yeah.
Truly scary.
So, what do we learn?
Wow. So we learned a lot. We learned, I think primarily we learn about the power of an artist to create of many artists together, writer,
Yes.
art, art, art director, to all together put a idea and a frame like, I mean, this is such a complete package of a movie, and I can't think of any other film or any other like, yeah, impacted by a single artist in the same way that this film and series was.
Yeah. This the film series, the bajillion dollars it's made would have been nothing had H.R. Giger not been a part of it. Um,
Hmm.
they provided such a cohesive foundation for everything that would come later, for every part of the alien in this movie, for everything that we find like scary and memorable here. He's a huge, huge influence on all of that. And you wouldn't have got it if you didn't have his unique vision and outlook that he had to make this. Um,
Yeah, yeah, he really made this what it is, and his art and his vision it was incredible. This is why we need artists. This is why we need film. We need something that's different and new, and people who think up new things and who dream and have ideas, and it can really create something that pushes the bounds of everything.
yeah, it really did.
Yeah,
And
this is so out of the box.
it's one of the things that like makes me look at this era of cinemas, movies, and media where there were just so many new and fresh ideas and people willing to take chances on artists and talent to be able to make Alien, to be able to make Star Wars, that made springboards for huge you know collaborative works of art and really amazing things.
And we're
um
doing it at really small budgets too,
yeah.
and making do with strange materials, and but not sacrificing anything for the cause.
Yeah, like, and any problem they had where they were like, well, we can't build another big set. Well, let's just make it modular so we can move it around. Well, we want to have, these shots. Okay, well, let's, make a different miniature projector screen. Oh, we want to, have these costumes and these things. Okay, well, let's just reuse them a bunch of times, put them throughout the ship. Um, it's in this era more so than now in filmmaking, you see so many people who are working together to like you know, uh, make a hodgepodge of things to come up with really creative solutions to make something right, to make something tactile and real. Whereas now I feel like we've fallen into a trap of, well, we can just put put it in post. We can just hire a, outsource an animation artist group, underpay them, and make them do all of these effects and things, and not have the real tactile costumes or makeup or effects because those are more work for us, despite the fact that computer generated images are not only incredibly expensive and time consuming, but consume so many artistic resources.
Yeah, and I think that's the other thing is that, the time scale of all this has changed, and how films are made have changed so significantly that, it's hard to get all of these creatives together in a room to be able to come up with these kinds of ideas and to be able to run with them and collaborate and make this kind of a vision a reality.
Yeah, certainly nowadays, I don't think so many people would be so willing to take a chance on and base almost an entire movie around one painting in some guy's book that they met in Paris while doing another artistic project. I feel like the mediascape, while everybody's a whole lot more connected now, social landscape, and it's so much easier to find great art and ideas from people. It's so much easier to share them, at least, that far less money, resource, and attention is being given to people who have a vision, and more is given to, the endless string of Alien movies and Star Wars and things that, have these return on investments. We're not taking a chance on the next ones.
Well, and I think part of the problem is too that it is very hard to come up with an original vision, for anything like this just remotely because it would be too much like Alien. Like that's the pervasive quality of this film in its franchise is that like how many films are there's four original Aliens, then two or three Alien versus Predator and two Prometheus.
Yeah, two prequels, and then I saw there was going to be a show that was being made, and there's also going to be a movie that's disconnected from the rest of it, but still under Alien.
Yeah, so I mean this is a huge franchise and it endures because of how well fleshed out it is, how like deep the intellectual property is. Like you can take this in so many different directions, whether you go before Alien and after or mixing franchises like they did with Alien versus Predator
Yeah,
and
yeah, in a very similar way that we see, big movie characters or big media characters like, let's say, Batman, for example. Every few years he gets remade, and a new light comes down on it. Um, Alien could very easily become one of those things, and sort of has been, but it's taken a much different approach. Um, I think if you were to give, the idea of, oh, people come across the alien to a bunch of different, directors and creatives, you could have 100 different stories about what happens.
yeah.
Yeah, so since we started talking about, the greater Alien franchise at large, I think we can add a little bit more to our "What Did We Learn" segment. Fuck corporate space. We don't need that. We don't need an actual Wayland Yutani put people's lives over the profits or finding the ultimate killing machine. We don't need that. We don't need Virgin Galactic and SpaceX. Let's just keep going with NASA so they can do the right thing when we find an alien. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, at some point you have to kind of hope there are no aliens so that we don't encounter these kinds of problems.
yeah. Um, so like I mentioned earlier, I watched the second Aliens, which is horrible fucking title. Um, and it,
I like it.
I mean, it's there's certainly more than one. It's a much different film. It comes from James Cameron. He directed that one. It, has so much of a different pace and different theme. It's an action movie, whereas this is a horror movie. And I found it quite a bit less engaging, but it's still entertaining. Um, it has less of the themes we talked about. It has less of like the interest. It adds more depth to the aliens having the queen and the cocoons and eggs and affecting a lot more people and brings in the mythos of the space marines and that sort of thing. But the design of the ships, the design of the locations, it's all so much less. It's a lot more blocky and streamlined and looks like it's all made of, stainless steel. It's not the old bombers or uh organic designs.
Yeah, it's more of a 5/1.
Yes. A little bit, yes. Um so before we started recording this, we talked briefly about went over what we were talking about and brought up, well, we can talk about the prequels to Alien. And I think the prequels to Alien, Prometheus and Covenant, really start to break down the mythos, and I don't think they're good in that regard. In in
Yeah,
2000,
see, for
oh, go
me,
ahead.
I liked Prometheus, and I don't remember Covenant, and I'm really struggling to remember if I even saw it, which is a little disturbing. But I like Prometheus.
So like the crux of it is we're coming back to this property after 30 years, and they want to answer more questions that the viewers had, and then they end up kind of touching on who the space jockey was, and sort of a little bit about what the ships are and the emergence of Alien, but like there's nothing concrete that, and it's not really an interesting framing device for coming across these monsters, and it doesn't really become a monster movie until the very end. The themes are sort of there, but it and part of the reason I don't like it is because it tries to answer all these questions that take out the mystique of Alien, and it starts to rewrite kind of like the history that exists there of this being like this totally foreign thing. And at least in Covenant, it leads you to believe that uh, aliens are more of a product of human engine, or excuse me, of android engineering than they are of this mystical space group. It's very strange and complicated and convoluted, and could have been its completely own thing and detached from the alien mythos.
Yeah, that's true. Would it have been better for them to just completely, make a new series rather than on a series on those ideas rather than continue the alien mythos? So, using the alien as a marketing ploy to continue a series that might have been better off as just being its own thing.
Yeah, to me, that's what it feels like because it is on a very surface level connected. It doesn't have the same themes and ideas to the extent. It doesn't feel like Alien. It feels like something else that they're just tying it to, which is very weird. Even considering that Alien versus Predator certainly doesn't have any of the themes of the Alien films, but it has the alien, the monster, and it has like its own mythos behind it. I feel like that one always felt more like an Alien movie than Prometheus to me, but um, I think this fits into what I was saying about Ripley being a larger than life thing. Like Alien isn't just Alien. It's every time you played with the action figures or read a comic book or had nightmares about the damn thing or the video
Yeah.
games and stuff. And I feel like the prequel films don't necessarily fit into what I associate with it.
Well, and I think that, in the grand scheme of things, like that's one of the great things that they did with these movies is that they released them It's not like the Marvel movies that have come like one after the other, like bam, bam, bam.
Yeah,
The Alien movies have been, slowly over the course of, 40 years, they've been releasing these movies so that it impacts a different audience in different ways continually over time. Like one of my favorite movies in the franchise is Alien versus Predator, where they're in um, Antarctica,
yeah,
which I know that most people hate that movie. But
yes,
for me, it like clicks so many boxes. You have weird archaeology, you have, Alien, you have a horror aspect, but you also have this like crazy cool predator, doing his stuff. Like and that action movie. And then you also have the female heroine.
yes, you do.
So, I mean, for me, it's a good movie and certainly a blockbuster. I mean, it's not something that I think deserves to win an Academy Award, but I like that movie.
Yeah, I've always entertained to watch that one. Um,
Yeah, it's entertaining. I mean,
yeah,
and I think that maybe that's the difference between many of the sequels are just entertaining, whereas the original Alien is more than that.
yeah, yeah. I feel like that's the proper conclusion to draw here. Is while Alien 2 is entertaining, it doesn't have the themes and the violence and the ideas that linger with you. Um, and that's something I like about movies. I like when they stick with you for days and days on end after you watch them. Whether that be by the feelings or thoughts or the nightmares. It's all great.
Yeah, and I mean, this is one horrifying monster.
Yeah, not even the vacuum of space would kill it. So good luck.
Yeah. Okay, well, I guess that's about all I got.
Yeah, uh, this is a film we both really enjoyed. We really like
Hmm.
talking about it. We hope you got something out of listening. If you have more thoughts or think we got something wrong, feel free to tell us.
Yeah, yeah, comment, like, subscribe, rate the whatever, do the engagement, tell us what you think, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks so much.